So welcome back. Tonight we're going to be talking about the 11th step and about meditation. And I'm actually going to spend a fair amount of time reading out of the book because I can't do any better than this Bhikkhu Bodhi at trying to explain some of the subtleties of mindfulness. But I want to start with something that I think it's out of Jack Kornfield's book. I copied it somewhere, and it's called The Entire Teaching. It is Jack Kornfield. He reserved a whole chapter for the entire teaching, and this is it. The entire chapter of the book. It's and to quote, "I've reserved a whole chapter to make a simple statement. The entire teaching of Buddhism can be summed up in this way. Nothing is worth holding on to. If you let go of everything, objects, concepts, teachers, Buddha, self, senses, memories, life, death, freedom, let go and all suffering will cease. The world will appear in its pristine, self-existing nature, and you will experience the freedom of the Buddha. The rest that follows in this book are useful approaches and techniques for learning to let go." Just like we say in the rooms. It's about learning to let go. Terry and I have a thing on the wall that says, that life is about how well have you learned to live, to love, and to let go. And that's a lot of what we're working on, and we're going to really be focusing on a little bit more tonight. I'm going to start with some things out of the big book. And it may seem a little surprising that I choose some of these quotes because they may sound a tad more orthodox than one would expect someone doing this type of teaching to have, but I think they're totally apropos. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Now, earlier today when we talked about the first two of the Eightfold Path, when we talked about right view and right intent, we were talking about what amounts to clearing our minds of wrong motives. We were talking about letting go of those ways of conceptualizing thinking that weren't helpful to us. And so although the language is a little bit different, I think really we're saying the same thing. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. What used to be a hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. So, sometimes I think the languages can get in the way of talking about the underlying meanings. And when I think about myself prior to getting sober and when I am in a really pretty emotionally sober state, I see the difference between being scattered, being indecisive, being full of self-pity, being at risk of asking for, for God for some particular direction that is really being totally driven by my own subconscious and unconscious and rationalizations. A couple other thoughts on that. We A's are active folk enjoying the satisfactions of dealing with the realities of life, usually for the first time in our lives, and strenuously trying to help the next alcoholic who comes along. So isn't it surprising that we often tend to slight serious meditation and prayer as something not really necessary? To be sure, we feel it is something that might help us to meet an occasional emergency, but at first many of us are apt to regard it as a somewhat mysterious skill of clergymen from which we may hope to get a second-hand benefit. Or perhaps we don't believe in these things at all. We liked AA all right, and we're quick to say that it done miracles, but we recoiled from meditation and prayer as obstinately as the scientist who refused to perform a certain experiment lest it prove his pet theory wrong. And as I'm reading this, I'm going back and thinking about the first couple of the Eightfold Path. There is a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and benefit, but when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. Now and then, we may be granted a glimpse of that ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom, and we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm will be secure for as long as we try, however faultily, to find and do the will of our Creator. I actually went on there a little bit longer than I planned to, but it doesn't really change the teaching for me. So, as we get into talking about right mindfulness and concentration, when one gets deeply into concentration, one experiences the absorptions, or the jhanas. And when one reads in depth about those, you would very clearly understand that saying, we are experiencing this kingdom that's on the other side of things that we don't normally experience. So I don't think there's any contradiction there. Meditation is our step out into the sun. How then shall we meditate? The actual experience of meditation and prayer across the centuries is, of course, immense. The world's libraries and places of worship are treasure trove for all seekers. And we read down from there, I think that most of us are familiar with this. We end up reading the 11th step prayer, was St. Francis' prayer, Francis being a very prominent Christian and Catholic saint theologian. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred I may bring love, that where there is wrong I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord I may bring harmony, that where there is error I may bring truth, that where there is doubt I may bring faith, that where there is despair I may bring hope, that where there are shadows I may bring light, that where there is sadness I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved, for it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven, it is by dying that one awakes to eternal life. Amen. It's very interesting to me. I've been reading this prayer since I got sober. And as I've gotten further into the Buddhist teachings, it strikes me as more and more directly related to what we've been talking about all day, which has to do with our intentions, with our view, with our motivations, and with living an ethical and moral life. And so as beginners in meditation, we might now reread this prayer several times very slowly, savoring every word and trying to take in the deep meaning of each phrase and idea. It will help if we can drop all resistance to what our friend says, for in meditation, debate has no place. And a little further along, meditation is something which can always be further developed. It has no boundaries either of width or height. Aided by such instruction and example as we can find, It is essentially an individual adventure, something which each one of us works out in his own way, which to me speaks to exactly what we've been talking about all day. And then finally, one of its first fruits is emotional balance. And that, I think, is something that is absolutely true. And I also believe that it's one reason that we need to regularly and continuously continuing to do the meditation and to bring us back to the here and now. Because it's not an intellectual exercise. It's a practice that permits us to let go of the fear, let go of the projection, let go of the regrets, and be able to get in touch with, as the ninth step promises offer us, the ability to intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And earlier in this chapter, they're talking about that as coming from a direct communication with God, and for all I know, maybe it is. But I do believe for sure that if I'm emotionally centered and balanced, and I'm not operating out of fear or anger, the quiet inner voice is accessible to me, and I'm able to live, as it says here, on a much higher plane. And that's what, in simple terms, and in certainly the beginning stages, that's how I think we're working. Perhaps one of the greatest rewards of meditation and prayer is the sense of belonging that comes to us. We no longer live in a completely hostile world. We are no longer lost and frightened and purposeless. Pretty big promise. And I think it happens. I'm going to switch over to another language now. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments they want to make? So we're talking about the 11th step, and we're talking about meditation and right mindfulness. And as I was preparing for this part, I wanted to come up with a few pithy quotes that would show you how evolved I am and how unbelievably articulate I was at delivering very complex and subtle concepts. And luckily for you, I gave up. I'm going to read, this is going to be the longest reading that I will do this weekend. And if anybody wants me to stop and repeat anything, go like that, because this writer is incredibly articulate and has a better vocabulary. Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Oh.
Oh, you haven't introduced yourself.
Oh. Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Amanda's joined us from Rutland this evening. That was a lovely color on you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And so far today, Amanda, we've been going through we started really with the Four Noble Truths and the first 6 of the Eightfold Path.
Okay.
And so now we're heading towards step 11 tonight and 12 tomorrow. And I have an outline that I can give you somewhere before tonight's over. And I apologize for embarrassing you. Right mindfulness. The Buddha says that the Dhamma, the ultimate truth of things, is directly visible, timeless, calling out to be approached and seen. He says further that it is always available to us, and that the place where it is to be realized is within oneself. The ultimate truth, the Dhamma, and I'm going to start saying Dharma just because it's easier and more familiar to me. The Dharma is not something mysterious and remote, but the truth of our own experience. It can be reached only by understanding our experience, by penetrating it right through to its foundations. This truth, in order to become liberating truth, has to be known directly. It is not enough merely to accept it on faith, to believe it on the authority of books or a teacher, or to think it out through deductions and inferences. It has to be known by insight, grasped and absorbed by a kind of knowing which is also an immediate seeing. What brings the field of experience into focus and makes it accessible to insight is a mental faculty called in Pali sati. Sati is usually translated as mindfulness. Mindfulness is presence of mind, attentiveness, or awareness. Yet the kind of awareness involved in mindfulness differs profoundly from the kind of awareness at work in our usual mode of consciousness. All consciousness involves awareness in the sense of a knowing or experiencing of an object. But with the practice of mindfulness, awareness is applied at a special pitch. The mind is deliberately kept at the level of bare attention. The mind is deliberately kept at the level of bare attention, a detached observation of what is happening within us and around us in the present moment. In the practice of right mindfulness, the mind is trained to remain in the present, open, quiet, and alert, contemplating the present event. All judgments and interpretations have to be suspended, or if they occur, just registered and dropped. The task is simply to note whatever comes up, just as it is occurring, riding the changes of events in the way a surfer rides the waves of the sea. The whole process is a way of coming back to the present, of standing in the here and now without slipping away, without getting swept away by the tides of distracting thoughts. I'm going to stop there for a minute. This afternoon, when most of you were out doing walking meditation, a handful of us stayed in here for a sitting meditation, and while we were doing that, we were entertained by the arrival of all the people that were coming for the 2 o'clock, I think, Al-Anon meeting. And so the door kept opening and people kept coming in, being confused, and eventually generally leaving, although we did have to escort 1 or 2 through. And so everyone who was trying to meditate was having these influences come in, and the distractions and the thoughts that they cause. And as we're talking about mindfulness in this reading, we're also talking about, at least at the beginning stages, meditation. Somewhere down the road, our entire life becomes a meditation, but most of us probably aren't quite there yet. And the work of a meditator is to note it and let it pass through. One of the many sayings they have as their teachers, it's like AA, the Buddhists have a lot of sayings, it's not the wave. The wave is not the ocean. The wave is just a wave. So when that person comes in, you note the wave and let the wave pass through. And ultimately, we settle down into a deeper and deeper place. And we're no longer, in all likelihood, no longer as inclined to be irritated by the disturbance, to have the disturbance take us back to something 20 years ago that was disturbing, and then something to take us 20 years into the future by something that is either a terrible problem or a wonderful victory. We keep coming back to now, and over time we come back to now more quickly and more skillfully, and with less drama in the midst of our meditation. It might be assumed that we are always aware of the present, but this is a mirage. In speaking of this, he's talking both in this consciousness, in this state, and in meditation. It might be assumed that we're always aware of the present, but this is a mirage. Only seldom do we become aware of the present in the precise way required by the practice of mindfulness. In ordinary consciousness, the mind begins a cognitive process with some impression given in the present, but it does not stay with it. Instead, it uses the immediate impression as a springboard for building blocks of mental constructs which remove it from the sheer facticity of the datum. The cognitive process is generally interpretive. The mind perceives its object free from conceptualization only briefly. Then immediately after grasping the initial impression, the door opening, it launches on a course of ideation by which it seeks to interpret the object to itself, to make it intelligible in terms of its own categories and assumptions. To bring this about, the mind posits concepts, joins the concepts into constructs, sets of mutually corroborative concepts, then weaves the constructs together into complex interpretive schemes. Which is me all over. In the end, the original direct experience, the door opening, has been overrun by ideation, and the presented object appears only dimly through dense layers of ideas and views, like the moon through a layer of clouds. The Buddha calls this process of mental construction elaboration, or embellishment, or conceptual proliferation. The elaborations block out the presentational immediacy of phenomena. They let us know the object only at a distance, not as it really is. But the elaborations do not only screen cognition, they also serve as a basis for projections, as we go off and awfulize the future in projections. The deluded mind, cloaked in ignorance, projects its own internal constructs outwardly, ascribing them to objects as if they really belong to it. As a result, what we know as the final object of cognition, what we use as the basis for our values, plans, and actions, is a patchwork product, not the original article. To be sure, the product is not wholly illusion, not sheer fantasy. It takes what is given in immediate experience as its groundwork and raw material, but along with this, it includes something else, the embellishments fabricated by the mind. So this I see all the time as whether in my drinking days or in my days in sobriety, as I hear a noise in the distance, and it's clearly the postman coming or the fire truck leaving or this and that. It doesn't necessarily have any connection at all with the story I'm telling myself, but to me the story is real and important. The springs for this process of fabrication, hidden from view, are the latent defilements. And as a footnote, the latent defilements are the last ones to go as we continue along the path of developing mindfulness. The defilements create the embellishments, project them outwardly, and use them as hooks for coming to the surface, where they cause further distortion. To correct the erroneous notions is the task of wisdom. But for wisdom to discharge its work effectively, it needs direct access to the object as it is in itself, uncluttered by conceptual elaborations. The task of right mindfulness is to clear up the cognitive field. Mindfulness brings to light experience in its pure immediacy. It reveals the object as it is before it has been plastered over with conceptual paint, overlaid with interpretations. To practice mindfulness is thus a matter not so much of doing, but of undoing. Not thinking, not judging, not associating, not planning, not imagining, not wishing. All these doings of ours are modes of interference, ways the mind manipulates experience and tries to establish its dominance. Mindfulness undoes the knots and tangles of these doings by simply noting. It does nothing but note, watching each occasion of experience as it arises, stands, and passes away. In the watching, there's no room for clinging, no compulsion to saddle things with our desires. There is only a sustained contemplation of experience in its bare immediacy, carefully and precisely and persistently. Mindfulness exercises a powerful grounding function. It anchors the mind securely in the present so it does not float away into the past and future with their memories, regrets, fears, and hopes. The mind without mindfulness is sometimes compared to a pumpkin. The mind established in mindfulness to a stone. A pumpkin placed on the surface of a pond soon floats away and always remains on the water's surface. But a stone does not float away. It stays where it is put, and it once sinks into the water until it reaches bottom. Similarly, when mindfulness is strong, the mind stays with its object and penetrates its characteristics deeply. It does not wander and merely skim the surface as the mind destitute of mindfulness does. Got about another page. Mindfulness facilitates the achievement of both serenity and insight. It can lead to either deep concentration or wisdom, depending on the mode in which it is applied. And then in this following part, we're going to actually be circling around to some earlier discussions we've had. Merely a slight shift in the mode of application can spell the difference between the course of contemplative process takes. Let me try that again. Merely a slight shift in the mode of application can spell the difference between the course the contemplative process takes, whether it descends to deeper levels of inner calm, culminating in the stages of absorption, the jhanas, or whether instead it strips away the veils of delusion to arrive at penetrating insight. To lead to the stages of serenity, the primary chore of mindfulness is to keep the mind on the object, free from strain. Mindfulness serves as the guard charged with the responsibility of making sure that the mind does not slip away from the object to lose itself in random, undirected thoughts. It also keeps watch over the factors stirring in the mind and catching the hindrances beneath their camouflages and expelling them before they can cause harm. To lead to insight and the realizations of wisdom, mindfulness is exercised in a more differentiated manner. Its task in this phase of practice is to observe, to note, to discern phenomena with utmost precision until their fundamental characteristics are brought to light. Right mindfulness is cultivated through a practice called the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, the Satipatthana, a mindful contemplation of four objective spheres: the body, feelings, states of mind, and phenomena. And I think we're going to stop there. So there's two types of potential outcomes. One is serenity, which comes from the single point of concentration, the samadhi meditation, the first one that we did, I think, last night. And the deeper concentration and insight comes from the other type of meditation that follows from the Satipatthana Sutta, which is Vipassana meditation. So that is about right mindfulness. Just one sec, I'll be with you. Just a sec, Mario. There's actually a bunch more that I'd love to read, but I think that's enough. So I couldn't express more clearly the two different, or more precisely, the two differences between the single point of concentration that leads to serenity and the differentiated approach which leads to insight. Different techniques, both with a lot of overlapping characteristics, and quite honestly, it's impossible for me to do a Vipassana meditation without also doing samadhi meditation. So if any of you were going to go on for additional teaching and you're wondering, what should I be doing? Oh, I'm doing it wrong. Oh, this is terrible. Don't worry about it. Just practice. Margot?
I was just thinking when you were doing this reading, I have a grandson who is 18 months, and I've been observing him very focused. I've been focused, in a very focused manner. I have been observing him since he was 5 pounds and 5 ounces. And what I've been noticing, without even knowing it, is this very concentrated way that he is exploring every little thing, and he spends a great deal of time. It made me think that what we need to do is to get to that point where we are doing just what he does. He just takes one little item, one little patch of sand, and he takes his feet and he explores everything, every little surface and every little space, and he does it for what seems like forever. But he's getting a body sense and a mind sense of what is there.
He's totally present.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is mindfulness. Yes, Stu.
Could you give a little elaboration on the explanation about the pumpkin and the stone, please?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, being alcoholics in recovery and talking about hitting bottom, I'm going, oh, that's not going to work well. As we become more mindful, we become more competent and skillful at not wandering off onto either extraneous and random thoughts, or taking a thought of from gee, I'm hungry, to the wonderful meal that I had in California in 1989.
Monkey brain.
It can be monkey brain, yeah, that's the same concept, all sorts of thoughts coming in. And there's also the simple sort of, whether it's daydreaming or idle ruminations, with the mind wandering here and there. Quite often off into the future, and all the problems that we're clearly going to have back there, and into the past, and how our past has in fact ruined our present and will probably ruin the future. And so it fits in, for me, totally with the concept of starting with one day at a time, which is code for be here now. And it speaks to more skillfully developing the ability to be here now. And the word that Bhikkhu Bodhi used was more precisely. More precisely be here now. More skillfully notice the difference between the door opening when I'm trying to meditate and it going to that inconsiderate person who clearly should know better and should have gone around to the front. And that's, that's where our minds go in some variation. And so the rock is one that would just take the noticing of the door, become aware of the sound, register door noise, and go back to following the breath or observing. If we're doing Vipassana meditation, you might be focusing on the pain in your knee or whatever is going on, and you come back to that rather than elaborating on the what the noise actually means. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I was drawn by, earlier you said the fire truck. Now that automatically evokes certain issues when you hear a fire truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering how you would, in what you're saying, deal with the fire truck. Because to me a fire truck means
if it's pulling
fire
into the driveway, okay. Actually.
But you don't know that. You're sitting there.
If I heard a fire truck coming my way and I lived in the country, I very well might lose my concentration on my mantra and drift off into listening to whether it recedes. If I'm a volunteer firefighter, I also, it might be time to end my meditation and to follow through on my commitments. Whenever you're meditating, if something needs to be attended to, you're always capable of attending to it. And you should attend to it, rather than have the little voice back here going, you need to be doing something else, you need to be doing something else. I'm not advocating that we repress, suppress, and deny important information. But what we are working to do is more skillfully interpret that information so we know more accurately whether we need to take some action. And if we don't need to take action, it's, you're living in a city and it's a random siren of a fire truck or an ambulance or a cop car, you just note fire truck and return to your breath. Police car, return to your breath. What's more likely to happen is, we'll hear a fire truck and it'll remind us of sometime early in our life when there's a fire or something we've read in the newspaper that day. And that's what the elaborations all are.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, and the elaborations are generally where we are in our waking time. When we are in a situation like this, or when we're in a social setting, or when we're walking down the street or driving down the road, I would be very surprised if you actually are present in what you're doing, depending on the person. Some people it's as little probably as 10% of the time, and some people that are really aware and present, 60, 70, 80% of the time. But everybody that I have interacted with is spending as much time operating on automatic or operating out of their unconscious as they are out of their consciousness. And so what we're doing is increasing the percentage of time that we're actually consciously aware and present. And in doing that, what happens is the amount of fear and anxiety and shame and guilt and regret that we carry about diminishes. Because most of our fear and anxiety has to do with our projections, has to do with our imaginings of all the things that are going to go wrong in the future that we're not aware we're projecting. It's not like we're all consciously spending all our time going, oh man, tomorrow is just going to suck, and next week's going to suck, and it's going to be worse than that next year. Some of us do that. But most of us are just doing that on a low, chronic level that we're not aware of. And this process of developing mindfulness via meditation helps us greatly reduce those negative characteristics, those negative traits. Ultimately, and if we were doing a retreat on Buddhism from the 12 steps versus the 12 steps from a Buddhist perspective, we'd be more focused on then taking this and progressing further and more dramatically along the path towards awakening or nirvana, nibbana in Pali. And that is attainable, and I would recommend that all of you continue to study and do retreats and take further trainings in meditation. But it's a slightly different focus than this weekend. It's sort of more so. I encourage it. I just don't want you to think you've already gotten it this weekend. Okay? Yeah.
Do you have, or do you recommend a way, or do you have a tool to help you when you're meditating, to help you stay focused, to help with the monkey brain, to help from all the thoughts coming in, and either the past or the future? When I was doing some yoga practice, and I found something that helped me was specific words or prayer that would help me. It was a positive, like, affirmation. I would inhale love, exhale gratitude, and that would keep me with the breath in a positive way, so I wasn't just focusing on the breath, on the breath, on the breath, because then I start to ventilate. So I try to, I try not to try so hard, but when I meditate, I find I do better when I'm in a specific prayer even. Do you find that is helpful, or are you just in a state of being?
I would love to say I'm just in a state of being. But my wife is here, so I can't get rid of that. I was talking with, I think, Chris earlier today, and when we did this samadhi meditation last night, I neglected to talk about using a mantra of some sort. Whether transcendental meditation is sort of like the McDonald's of meditation. They've served millions And they've really done a lot to spread the concept of meditation and being present, and I think that's all wonderful. They do charge quite a lot of money for it, which I find a little frustrating. But one of the things that they do is when they teach TM is they give each one of the students a mantra. And I think that that is helpful. And I have a very difficult time differentiating between TM and Samadhi meditation, with a couple of exceptions. One being when you're taught to do Samadhi or Vipassana, you're encouraged to stay with your pose or position, even if you're feeling uncomfortable, and develop the awareness that goes with the pain. The Maharishi Mahesh did let his students know, if you have an itch, scratch it. So that's one difference that I know of between TM and Samadhi, but it's the only one I really know of. And I think that a mantra is very helpful for beginning meditators, and it can be very easily just inhale and exhale, or in, out, or up, down. It can be a prayer, the serenity prayer. I think when Catholics say the rosary, to a large extent, they're meditating. I don't think that most people who are repeating that many prayers are actually concentrating on the content of the words. It's more of a vehicle to let go of the past and the future, and to show up there. As I've been moving from the Samadhi into the Vipassana and going to more retreats, in Vipassana they do say, no, you have to get away from having mantras. You have to get away from having any words. They will say, if you're following inhale, exhale, or maybe some mantra given to you that's in Pali or Sanskrit or something, it will help you relax, as the Samadhi does, but it will reduce the likelihood of your developing more insights. So what I'm doing now, as I say this, I'm repeating the teachings that I've been given, and I would suggest that you practice it for a few years and then get back to me on whether it makes a dramatic difference or not. So I would, my view is, you said one of the things was getting better. Becoming a better meditator. One of the things that I would continue to say is, when possible, let go of trying to be a better meditator. Now, practice regularly. And if you're falling asleep, notice I'm falling asleep. And you can fall asleep with self-criticism or without it. And I would recommend you bring yourself back to your breath. You develop, the techniques of energizing yourself, whether it's opening your eyes and meditating, or standing up, or doing walking meditation, but without going into that negative space of, I'm not good enough, I should be better than this by now. We talk about that in AA all the time. And it holds true in all these other areas. And that is, I think, a really high spiritual achievement, is to be able to be in this world without the negative self-talk. Ultimately, we are trying to stop the violence against ourselves, and that takes time and energy. You're welcome. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, when I went on that meditation walk, it ended up at the general store with some guy yelling and screaming at his wife. But I was in a frame of mind that, to me, it was just an observe it, and it didn't affect me. But I had a little problem with the coffee pot deal.
And so,
I don't know, I kind of reacted,
so you can
it
feel
came
it.
out of nowhere.
Yeah, and that's fine. I don't know if when in between the meeting and now, there was some discussion of who was going to clean the coffee pot and empty it, which is a perfect example. So in that instance, and if Mike's in here, this is fine, is he was your teacher. And he was helping you learn about how you feel in those settings. And it was pretty easy to see his energy and yours and mine. And it is all okay.
Okay.
And we screw up. And a lot of what we're doing is evolving so that when situations like that happen, instead of becoming stressed out or insane 4 out of 5 times, we only become stressed out or insane 1 out of 5 times. And eventually it stretches out to 1 out of 10, and it's very small, and only somebody that really knows you would realize that you are stressed. And eventually you get to a point where you'll experience anything like that with love and compassion. And that really is ultimately where we want to get with it. I don't know if that will take you all the way to enlightenment, but it will give you an auspicious rebirth. So, and it'll leave you feeling good in the meantime. Actually, I wanted to do a meditation tonight also. And now would be a good time, because we're going to run out of time if we don't do it now. So if you could all get into positions in which you're comfortable doing a meditation. And what we're going to do, similar to earlier today, I gave you a very short and brief. Are you familiar with meditating, Amanda? Okay. I gave you a very pretty superficial introduction to how one would think about meditating based on the Satipatthana Sutta. And Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, comes out of that sutta, and it focuses on the whole body. Now, the Samadhi meditation we've been doing has been focusing primarily on single point of concentration, generally the breath. And in this, we're going to focus on our whole body. And so what I would like you to do is take a minute to let yourself know that you're about to meditate. Take a couple of deep breaths. You will still be hearing my voice for this meditation, but in the future, you will be able to guide yourself on this meditation. And how we're going to start the meditation is by noticing our entire body. And then, in more detail, we're going to focus on various parts of our body and become aware of the feelings that we are experiencing physically, the mental formations that arrive as we experience those feelings, and our ability to note our experience without judgment, without criticism, and to return to the here and now. So starting with your toes on your left foot. See if you can feel each individual toe. And notice what they feel like. You may notice if there's no socks in the air. If there are shoes or socks, you may notice how it feels in the restriction. Now add the toes on your right foot and the difference between your left foot and your right foot. The soles of your feet. Are you aware of them? Your ankles. What do I feel when I become aware of my ankles? Today we mentioned our skin. And I feel the skin on my shins, on my calves. Maybe notice noticing the sounds in the room, the nature of my voice, as you notice your knees in the front, in the back, whether they're at rest or providing discomfort. All we're doing is exploring our awareness of our whole self. As we notice this, we continue to breathe. And bring ourselves back to the now without judgment. As we move up our body, we move up to our thighs, our hips, and we notice the contact with the chair, or the couch, the floor. We notice the feeling of the air as it circulates. What are we experiencing in our lower torso? Skin and flesh and bones. So let's notice the food that we had or that we didn't have. The need to go urinate. The question that's attached to that. And we return to our awareness of the here and now. Explore our upper torso. Notice the air on our arms. We feel our fingers, each one, starting with the left hand and the baby finger. We find its location in the universe. And notice and return to here and now. Moving back up our body to our shoulders. We notice their position relative to our torso and to our neck. Whatever thoughts come in, the adjustments, the criticisms, and let them go. Our neck is on our shoulders. And we bring it into our attention. Are we compelled to move? We want a different neck, different chin. How often do I feel my ears? And my nose? My scalp. What does my hair feel like? Am I wandering off into wondering where my body will go and what it will be like? want to do. And I note with awareness and return to the here and now. In a minute I will be quiet and allow you to meditate on your own. And while you're meditating on your own, notice your whole body. Notice the parts of the body. Notice the impermanence of the feelings that you experience in each part of your body as your focus and your awareness changes. Notice the thoughts as they come in, and duly note happiness, sorrow, pain, cold, warm, guilt. And return to the here and now. Give yourself permission to be exactly where you are, without judgment, simply with noting, with the barest attention, with an absence of storyline and elaboration. Now I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes, and the meditation will end with the bell.